Today's lecture in anatomy and physiology will be on the appendicular muscles. Here's an outline of what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to warn you, this lecture is going to be a little longer than some of the others. So feel free to pause, take breaks, get a snack to eat, take a nap, whatever. But let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about muscles acting on the scapula. We will also talk about muscles acting along the shoulder joint. Upper extremity muscles, excluding intrinsic muscles of the hand, will be discussed. And we're going to talk about muscles in the arm, which again is the area between the shoulder and elbow, and muscles in the forearm. Muscles acting along the hip joint and thigh will also be discussed. We will talk about the hip flexors as well as the gluteal muscles. Lower extremity muscles, excluding intrinsic muscles of the foot, will also be discussed. We will talk about muscles in the thigh and muscles in the leg, which in anatomic terms refers to the lower leg. Muscles acting on the scapula. We have the anterior muscles and the posterior muscles. Anterior muscles include the Serratus anterior, which is here, and the pectoralis minor. Posterior muscles include the trapezius, the levator scapulae, the rhomboid major, and the rhomboid minor. Let's talk about the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior, serratus means sawtooth. Anterior means in front. It's a sawtooth muscle that wraps around to the front of the body, as you can see here. It originates from the first 8 or 9 ribs, and it inserts on the medial border of the scapula. It is innervated by the long thoracic nerve. And one thing that I have to say about this is that damage to this nerve, for example, during a modified radical mastectomy, can cause a winged scapula, in which the medial border of the scapula lifts off the posterior chest, taking on the appearance of a wing. There you go. This is your winged scapula. What exactly does a serratus anterior do? It draws the scapula forward, and the inferior fibers rotate the scapula superiorly. Basically, it keeps the scapula against the posterior chest wall, as you can see here in the normal scapula. Pectoralis minor. Pectoralis means chest. Minor means small. It's a small-ass muscle on the front of the chest. That's what the pectoralis minor is. It originates from the 3rd to 5th ribs, and it inserts on the coracoid process of the scapula. What does it do? It draws the scapula forward, medially, and downward. It sounds like it does a lot, but it really doesn't do much. It's basically a stabilizer muscle. It helps keep the scapula against the chest wall. It's innervated by the medial pectoral nerve. The trapezius. Now we're moving to the posterior muscles that act on the scapula. The trapezius, it's a 4-sided geometric figure with no parallel sides. And I never really thought about this before, but now that I look at the 4 sides of the trapezius, it is true that they're not really parallel. I would have just settled for the fact that it's a muscle with 4 sides. That being said, the trapezius originates from the occipital bone, the ligamentum nuchae, and the spinous processes of C7 to T12. So it originates from here. It originates from the back. And it inserts on the lateral third of the clavicle, the acromion, and the spine of the scapula. So it inserts on the clavicle and the scapula. It's innervated by the spinal accessory nerve. And what does it do? This is where you have to pay attention to the direction of the fibers. So the upper part elevates the scapula. So the upper part is fibers run upward. So when these fibers shorten, they elevate the scapula. The middle part retracts the scapula. These fibers shorten and they bring the scapula together posteriorly. The lower part depresses the scapula. So these fibers run downward. So they pull the scapula down. Levator scapulae. Levator scapulae literally means to elevate the scapula. Its name is telling you what it does. It originates from the transverse processes of C1 to C4, and it inserts on the superior angle of the scapula. And what does it do? It elevates the scapula. I just said the name says it all. Rhomboid, major, and minor. Rhomboid means diamond-shaped. Shine bright like a diamond. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. It reminded me of a song. Anyway, the rhomboid minor originates from the transverse processes of C7 to T1. The rhomboid major originates from the transverse processes of T2 to T5. So they originate here. Insertion. Both of them insert on the medial border of the scapula. The rhomboid minor inserts on the medial border of the scapula at the level of the scapular spine. The rhomboid major inserts at the medial border at the level below the scapular spine. So rhomboid minor inserts here, rhomboid major inserts here. What does it do? Its main action is to retract the scapula. If you look at the direction of the fiber, when they shorten, they pull the scapula, they retract the scapula backwards. And also has other minor functions such as elevating and rotating the scapula as well. Now let's talk about muscles acting on the glenohumeral joint. So here are the muscles that act on the shoulder joint. You got muscles that originate on the axial skeleton, such as the latissimus dorsi and the pectoralis major. You have muscles that originate on the scapula, such as the deltoid, teres major, as well as the pectoralis minor, which we already discussed, and the triceps brachii and biceps brachii, which will be discussed in the upper extremity section later. And we also have the rotator cuff muscles, which we're going to discuss subsequently as well. So let's talk about the latissimus dorsi. Latissimus means broadest. Dorsi means back. It is literally the broadest muscle on the back. It originates from the spinous processes of T7 to L5, the thoracolumbar fascia, and iliac crest. So it originates from the lower back and the hip bone. It inserts on the proximal humerus. It's innervated by the thoracodorsal nerve. What does it do? It extends the arm, so it brings this humerus back, following the direction of the fibers. It also adducts, which means it brings the arm closer to the center of the body. And look at its insertion here. So when it pulls, it also medially rotates the arm. Pectoralis major. Pectoralis, as I said before, means chest. Major means larger. So we talked about the pectoralis minor previously. Here's the pectoralis major. As you can see, it's clearly larger than the pectoralis minor. Where does it originate? It originates on the medial clavicle, the sternum, and the costal cartilages of ribs 2 through 6. And as a result, some people, especially fitness industry people and bodybuilders, actually divide this into a clavicular head, and a sternal head, or sternocostal head. It inserts on the proximal humerus. It is innervated by both the medial and lateral pectoral nerves. The medial pectoral nerve actually runs through the pec minor to innervate the pec major. What's its action? It flexes and adducts the arm, especially in a horizontal position. It also medially rotates the arm as well. So look at the fibers. But the main function of the pec major is to bring the two humeruses closer together. The deltoid. The deltoid is a triangle-shaped muscle. Deltoid means triangle shape. It resembles the Greek letter delta, which is this, and it looks like a triangle, which is this. So the deltoid originates from the lateral third of the clavicle and the acromion and spine of the scapula. It inserts on the proximal humerus. It's innervated by the axillary nerve. What does it do? Again, you got to pay attention to the direction of the fibers. So the anterior deltoid flexes the arm. So it raises the arm up. The middle deltoid abducts the arm. So raises the arm further away from the body. Abducts the arm. The posterior deltoid extends the arm. And it also externally rotates the arm. Anterior deltoid also internally rotates the arm. Teres major. Teres means round. Major means larger. I have to admit this is kind of a weak looking teres major, but it illustrates the origin from the inferior angle of the scapula and its insertion on the proximal humerus. It does the same stuff that the latissimus dorsi does, which it extends the arm, it adducts the arm, and it medially rotates the arm. So basically, whenever you're doing exercises that work your latissimus dorsi, you're also working your teres major. The rotator cuff. What is it? It's a joint. It is a group of 4 muscles which act to stabilize the shoulder joint. They all originate from the scapula and insert on the proximal humerus, thus forming a cuff around the shoulder joint. 3 out of the 4 muscles are named for the portion of the scapula from which it originates. And here you have your supraspinatus, which originates from the suprascapular fossa and inserts on the proximal humerus. You have your infraspinatus, which originates from below the scapular spine, hence infra. You have your subscapularis, which originates from the subscapular fossa. And you have your teres minor here. And these muscles basically form a muscular tendinous cuff around the shoulder and help stabilize it. And then the infraspinatus and teres minor, they have some role in lateral rotation of the arm. The supraspinatus actually participates in arm abduction. And actually, whenever you do a lateral raise, the first 15 degrees are actually done by the supraspinatus. The subscapularis, due to its insertion medially has some function in medially rotating the arm. Muscles of the upper extremity. So let's talk about muscles of the arm. You have the anterior compartment, or the flexor compartment, which consists of the biceps brachii, the brachialis, and coracobrachialis. And as I mentioned before, for the upper extremity as well as the lower extremity, when you know which compartment the muscle is in, you can deduce its function, and you can even deduce its innervation. So muscles in the anterior compartment, they flex the elbow and they're innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve. Muscles in the posterior compartment, which is only the triceps brachii, extend the elbow and are innervated by the radial nerve. Muscles in the anterior or flexor compartment of the forearm, they flex the wrist and digits. They generally have the word flexor in their name, as you'll see later. And these muscles are innervated by the median and ulnar nerves. Muscles in the posterior extensor compartment, they extend the wrist or digits. They generally have the word extensor in their name, and they're innervated by the radial nerve. So this is your anterior compartment, which is the biceps, coracobrachialis and brachialis. Your posterior compartment, which is your triceps brachii. Your anterior compartment, which contains your wrist and your wrist flexors. Your posterior compartment, which contains your wrist extensors. And one thing I have to note too is that the posterior compartment of the forearm is innervated by the radial nerve. The posterior compartment of the triceps brachii is innervated by the radial nerve. So all the muscles in the back of your arm, of your upper extremity, are innervated by the radial nerves. So that makes it easy to remember. Anterior compartment of the arm, biceps brachii, also known as a show muscle. So biceps means two heads, brachii means arm. And it has two heads. It has a long head, which originates from the scapula, and a short head, which also originates from the scapula. More precisely, the long head originates from the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. So basically, it originates above the glenoid cavity. The short head originates from the coracoid process. So long head, short head. They insert on the radius. And its actually a very strong supinator. So it turns the palms up. Palm anterior, supination. Palm posterior, pronation. Just in case you weren't sure what supination and pronation mean. The biceps brachii is actually a weak flexor of the forearm. It's a more powerful flexor when the hand is pointing upward, when the hand is in a supinated position. And as you already guessed, it's innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve because all muscles of the anterior compartment are innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve. Anterior compartment of the arm, brachialis. Brachialis means arm. It originates from the distal humerus and it inserts on the ulna. It flexes the forearm and is actually the prime mover of flexion. And it's innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve because all muscles in the anterior compartment are innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve. Anterior compartment of the arm, coracobrachialis. Coraco means coracoid process, brachialis, arm. It originates from the coracoid process of the scapula, which is part of the reason it's called the coracobrachialis. It inserts on the mid-humerus, and it flexes and adducts the arm, but it's actually a weak flexor and a weak adductor. So what I'm trying to say is the coracobrachialis really doesn't do much. It's also innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve because it's in the anterior compartment. Posterior compartment of the arm, triceps brachii. Triceps meaning you got three heads. Brachii, arm. Origin. The lateral head originates on the posterior humerus. The long head actually originates on the scapula, the infraglenoid tubercle to be exact. The medial head originates on the humerus as well. And all three heads insert on the olecranon of the ulna. And you may recall that the olecranon of the ulna articulates with the olecranon fossa of the humerus, forming the elbow joint. It extends the elbow and it's innervated by the radial nerve. Anterior compartment of the forearm, superficial group of flexors. So for these muscles, the name of the muscle says a lot, and for this reason, I'm not going to discuss every origin and insertion of these muscles. It's more important to know that these muscles flex the wrist and flex the fingers. So you got your brachioradialis, which originates in the humerus and inserts on the radius, which is why it's called brachioradialis. You have your flexor carpi radialis. You have your flexor carpi ulnaris. You have your flexor digitorum superficialis, which flexes digits 2 through 5. So flexor means it flexes, digitorum are digits, and digitorum generally refers to digits 2 through 5. The first digit tends to have its own special way of working. You have the palmaris longus and pronator teres. And you can look at this picture and study it to get a better idea of where these muscles lay. Anterior compartment of the forearm, the deep group. As I said before, the name of the muscle says a lot, and that's why I'm not going to discuss every origin and insertion of these muscles. You have the flexor digitorum profundus, which flexes digits 2 through 5. You have the flexor pollicis longus, and pollicis means thumb, and from its name it flexes the thumb. And you have your pronator quadratus. Posterior compartment of the arm, of the forearm, extensors. I know I've said this once or twice, I'm going to say it again. The name of the muscle says a lot. For this reason, I will not discuss every origin and insertion of these muscles. Also recall that pollicis means thumb. And I have a nice little diagram listing these muscles. We have the abductor pollicis longus, which abducts the thumb, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor carpi radialis longus, which both extend the wrist, extensor carpi ulnaris, which extends the wrist, extensor digiti minimi, which extends the fifth digit, which is why it's called digiti minimi, which means a small finger, which is the fifth digit, extensor digitorum, which extends digits 2 through 5. Digitorum means digits 2 through 5. Extensor indicis extends the second digit, or the middle finger. Extensor pollicis brevis and extensor pollicis longus, which both extend the thumb, and the supinator. Muscles acting along the hip. Hip flexors. You have your psoas major, iliacus. We also have the sartorius and rectus femoris, which will be discussed in the thigh section. We have gluteal muscles, such as the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and gluteus minimus. We have lateral thigh muscles, such as the tensor fascia latae. Hip flexors. Iliopsoas. The iliacus and psoas major combine to form the iliopsoas, which inserts on the femur by a common tendon. these muscles flex the thigh, hence hip flexors. So you have your iliacus, you have your psoas major, which come together to form a common tendon, which inserts on the proximal femur. The iliacus originates from the iliac bone, iliac fossa, which is why it's called the iliacus, and it inserts on the femur. The psoas major originates from the T12 through L5 vertebrae and inserts on the femur. And this is a picture just showing the origins and insertions. Another picture showing the origins and insertions. Gluteal muscles. Gluteus maximus. Gluteus means buttock, or that ass though, but only in a scientific sense. I just wanted to say that. Maximus means biggest. And actually the gluteus maximus is the biggest muscle in the body. And the gluteus maximus, it originates from the ilium, the sacrum, and the coccyx, and inserts on the femur and the iliotibial tract. The gluteus maximus, it extends the thigh. So look at the direction of the fibers. It brings this femur back. It also laterally rotates the thigh. So it rotates this thigh outward. Gluteal muscles, gluteus medius and minimus. So the gluteus medius and minimus, they both originate from the ilium, and they insert on the femur, and they function to abduct and to medially rotate the thigh. And then here you got your gluteus medius and gluteus minimus. And these two muscles, they play a huge role in balance when walking and standing on one foot. They prevent the hip from adducting in these positions. So they act as stabilizer muscles when you're standing on one foot or when you're walking. So this is just an illustration that again reiterates the stabilizing function of the gluteus maximus and the stabilizing function of the gluteus medius and gluteus minimus. So take some time to review this. Let's talk about deep muscles of the gluteal region. And these are deep muscles of the gluteal region that should be noted. Their function is to externally rotate the thigh. And these muscles are listed from superior to inferior. So you have your piriformis, which is named so because it's roughly pear-shaped. You have your superior gemellus, obturator internus, inferior gemellus, and quadriceps femoris. The superior and inferior gemellus are named the gemellus muscles because it derives from the Gemini twins, and these two muscles are kind of twins. You got a superior twin and an inferior twin. Quadriceps femoris is called that because it has four sides. It's a four-sided muscle. And obturator internus because it occludes. Obturator is anything that occludes an opening. So it's occluding this opening. Lateral thigh. Tensor fascia latae. Tensor means to stretch. Fascia is a band. Latae is side. It kind of sounds like something you could get at Starbucks. May I have an order of tensor fascia latae, please? I want it venti. I'm sorry, sir, we don't have that. So it sounds like something you might find at Starbucks, but it's not. And it originates from the iliac crest and the anterior superior iliac spine. And it inserts on the iliotibial tract. And its function is to abduct the thigh. Now let's talk about muscles of the lower extremity, the thigh. Thigh compartments. There's an anterior compartment, which consists of the quadriceps and the sartorius. It extends the knee, except for the sartorius, which flexes the knee. And it's innervated by the femoral nerve, because all muscles in the anterior compartment are innervated by the femoral nerve. Then there's a medial compartment, which is the adductor compartment, which consists of the adductor longus and brevis, the gracilis, the pectineus, adductor magnus, and obturator externus. And these function to adduct the thigh, and they're all innervated by the obturator nerve. Then there's a posterior compartment, which consists of the Biceps femoris, Semitendinosus, and Semimembranosus. These function to flex the knee, and they're also innervated by the tibial nerve. So here you got your anterior compartment, which is your quadriceps. I'm going to go into this muscle in more detail, and your sartorius. These are all innervated by the femoral nerve. You got your medial compartment, which is not well seen here. You got your posterior compartment, your biceps femoris, and your semimembranosus and tendinosus. Muscles of the lower leg. Muscles of the lower extremity, the leg. And the leg refers to the part of the lower extremity below the knee. So you got your leg compartments. You got your anterior compartment, which consists of the tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum longus, extensor hallucis longus, and fibularis tertius. So this is your anterior compartment. They function to dorsiflex the foot, which means the foot and the toes point up, and is innervated by the deep fibular or the deep peroneal nerve. You have the lateral compartment, which consists of the fibularis or peroneus brevis and longus, and these function to evert the ankle. So it turns the ankle outward. And this is innervated by the superficial fibular / peroneal nerve. And you have the posterior compartment, which is the gastrocnemius and soleus mainly, but also the flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus, plantaris, popliteus, and tibialis posterior. These plantar flex the foot, and they're innervated by the tibial nerve, which is also the same nerve that innervates the posterior compartment of the thigh for the most part. Anterior compartment of the thigh, Quadriceps femoris. Quadriceps means four heads. It functions to extend the knee. Since this is a four-headed muscle, each head has a name and origin. So the rectus femoris. So rectus femoris is right here. It originates from the anterior inferior iliac spine. Hence it crosses the hip joint, so it can function as a hip flexor as well as a knee extender. You have your vastus intermedius, which is covered by this. And when this is peeled away, you see the vastus intermedius. It's called that because it's intermediate. And as I said before, it's located under the rectus femoris. Vastus lateralis. It's located laterally, hence the name lateralis. Vastus medialis. It's located medially, hence the name medialis. And except for the rectus femoris, the rest of the quadriceps head originate directly from the femur. They all insert on the tibia, and they're all innervated by the femoral nerve. Anterior compartment of the thigh, sartorius. So even though it's in the anterior compartment, it's a little different. So sartorius is derived from sartor, which is a tailor. So just think of a tailor sitting cross-legged and it'll tell you what this muscle actually does. It originates from the anterior superior iliac spine. It inserts on the tibia. And unlike the rest of the muscles in the anterior compartment, it actually flexes the knee. It also has some role in hip flexion since it crosses both the knee and the hip joint. And it laterally rotates the thigh, which is exactly what happens when you have a sailor sitting cross-legged. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm amazed how they came up with this name for a muscle. Like they looked at this muscle and they thought about a sailor. Wow. It's innervated by the femoral nerve. So your sartorius coming off the anterior superior iliac spine, wrapping around, inserting on the tibia. Again, same thing, anterior superior iliac spine, inserting on the tibia. Medial compartment of the thigh, adductor longus, brevis, and magnus. Pectineus. These all originate from the pubis. So all these muscles originate from the pubis. They all insert on the femur. They all adduct the thigh, and they're all innervated by the obturator nerve. Medial compartment of the thigh, gracilis and obturator externus. So gracilis means slender. Gracilis, it originates on the pubis, and it inserts on the tibia. And it also functions to adduct the thigh. Obturator externus. Again, obturator means a structure occluding an opening. Externus means outside. It originates from the obturator foramen. It inserts on the femur, and it laterally rotates the thigh, similar to the obturator internus. So here's your obturator externus inserted on the thigh, and you can see how it laterally rotates the thigh. Posterior thigh compartment, hamstrings. Biceps femoris. Biceps means two heads. Femoris means thigh. So your arm is not the only place you can find a bicep. There's also a bicep in a thigh, but it's called the femoris to distinguish it from the biceps brachii in the arm. There's a long head and a short head, just like the biceps brachii. The long head originates on the ischial tuberosity. The short head originates on the femur. It inserts on the fibula, so it inserts laterally. And the action, both the long head and the short head flex the knee, but the long head also extends the hip since it crosses the hip joint by inserting on the ischial tuberosity. And you can see this clearly here. Posterior thigh compartment, hamstrings, semimembranosus and semitendinosus. Semi means half, membranosus means membrane, tendinosus means tendon. Their names describe their appearance. They originate from the ischial tuberosity, just like the biceps femoris does. And just for a fun fact, ischial tuberosity is a part of the ischium, the part of the hip that you sit down on. They insert on the medial tibia, and they act to flex the knee, but they also extend the hip since they cross the hip joint. So you got your biceps femoris, which we already talked about. You have your semitendinosus, and it's half tendon-like. Semimembranosus on this side and on this side. Again, got your semitendinosus muscle, originate from the ischial tuberosity, inserting on the tibia. Got your semimembranosus, and look at how it's flatter and more membrane shaped. Originates from the ischial tuberosity, inserts on the tibia. Anterior compartment of the leg, dorsiflexion. So the tibialis anterior is actually the most recognizable and biggest muscle in the anterior compartment, and it dorsiflexes the foot. You also have the extensor digitorum longus, which dorsiflexes the foot and extends its toes 2 through 5. Digitorum means digits 2 through 5. Extensor hallucis longus, which is from its name, it dorsiflexes the foot since it's in the anterior compartment, and it also extends the first toe, which is the hallux. Hallux means toe. Fibularis tertius, which also dorsiflexes the foot. Be aware of that one. Lateral compartment of the leg. Function, everts the ankle. You got your fibularis or peroneus longus and brevis, which function to avert the foot. These muscles originate from the fibula, hence their names. Fibularis longus, fibularis brevis, and the lateral compartment. Innervated by the deep peroneal nerve. Posterior compartment of the leg. Function, plantar flexion. The two main muscles are the gastrocnemius, which originates from the femur and inserts on the calcaneus. The soleus, which is underneath this gastrocnemius, which originates from the tibia and fibula and inserts on the calcaneus. So notice how the gastrocnemius crosses the knee joint because it inserts on the femur, while the soleus does not cross the knee joint. It inserts on the tibia and fibula. But both of these insert on the heel bone. Other muscles include the flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus, tibialis posterior, popliteus, and plantaris. But the ones I care about are the gastrocnemius and soleus. Those are the two most functional muscles. Finally, we're done. Thank you for your patience. Like this and subscribe.